He's slipping.
Tonight, John gives us the $2 million Double W Ranch.
A real man passes the torch now.
A real...
Sign. The ranch is ours.
You hit an old man and call it love. That's all anyone needs to know.
Daniel, stop!
Double W is operated under Marine Authority since 1998. No sale.
Dad, I see it now.
You can have my trust. He will never have this land.
Respect is the only currency I accept.
I gave my daughter everything, her college tuition, her first car, even a $600,000 wedding. But that night, her husband demanded my $2 million ranch like it was his birthright. Then, before 200 people, he struck me. My soul burned with betrayal. He thought he owned me and my land. He was wrong. The truth I carried would flip his world upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room of the old ranch house, the walls heavy with silence. The afternoon light poured through the lace curtains my wife Eleanor once loved, casting pale shadows across the wooden floorboards I had sanded myself nearly 40 years ago. My bones ached as I sank deeper into the armchair, but the ache in my chest was far worse. My mind drifted back to all I had given to my daughter, Caroline. I remembered wiring $60,000 for her college tuition, scraping from savings, and selling off a small herd of cattle just so she could study at the university she dreamed of. I remembered handing her the keys to her first car, a shiny silver sedan that cost me $25,000 cash. I remember her face lighting up, the way she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. And then there was her 21st birthday, a party that I poured $50,000 into. The garden was lined with lanterns, the band played until midnight, and guests whispered that it was the kind of celebration fit for a princess. Every sacrifice I made was worth it because I believed she was grateful, that she would one day carry forward the love and integrity Eleanor and I had built into this family. But as I sat there, surrounded by old photographs and quiet memories, I realized those sacrifices had become invisible to her. It was as if none of it mattered anymore. My eyes shifted to the wide window that framed the land outside, the Double W Ranch. $2 million worth of soil, timber, and sweat. A place that had been in my family since 1923, when my grandfather built the first cabin from pine he cut down with his own hands. I had spent my entire life caring for this land, planting every fence post, nursing every sick calf, patching the roof in the middle of storms. Eleanor and I built our lives here, raising Caroline among the rolling fields and the scent of cedar in the barn. The porch still carried the grooves of rocking chairs we sat in during summer evenings, listening to the cicadas hum. On the mantel above the fireplace rested our wedding picture, her veil caught by the wind, my arm steady around her shoulders. That house wasn't just lumber and nails. It was Eleanor's laughter echoing down the hall, Caroline's muddy boots by the door after playing in the creek, and the steady rhythm of life lived with purpose. To think of it as just an asset, just a number on a paper, $2 million to be traded away, felt like a knife driven deep into my ribs. The sting of betrayal cut sharper when I recalled what I had overheard. Caroline and her husband, Daniel, were whispering in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. Their words, low and cold, telling each other that I was losing my mind, that it was time to sell the ranch. They spoke of offers already lined up, $4.8 million from some developer who wanted to tear down the fields and raise condos. Condos on land my grandfather plowed by hand. Condos on soil that held Eleanor's roses and the oak tree under which we spread her ashes. My own daughter, the child I rocked to sleep, had agreed to let Daniel lead her, to see me as nothing more than an obstacle. They called me confused. They called me forgetful. They told each other that I didn't know what I was doing anymore. That night, hearing it, my heart collapsed in on itself. It wasn't just the ranch they wanted. It was my dignity, my history, my role as father. They wanted me out of the way, tucked into a nursing home, while they cashed in on the land. I thought betrayal was a word for stories in books, for other families, not mine. But betrayal was in my house now, wearing my daughter's face. The pain lingered heavily on my shoulders, but as I sat in the silence, something shifted. Grief turned into something hotter, something steadier. I stared at the picture of Eleanor above the mantel. "Eleanor," I whispered into the empty room, "show me the way. Don't let them take what we built." My voice cracked, but the fire inside me grew. I could almost hear her voice in the hush of the house, urging me not to give in. The man who raised Barnes with his bare hands, who worked nights to pay Caroline's tuition, was not helpless. I would not let Daniel's greed and Caroline's blindness erase Eleanor's legacy. They thought I was weak, that age had dulled me, but they had forgotten I was still here. I felt something I hadn't in months, resolve, a strength like iron set into my bones. If they wanted war over this land, then war is what they would get. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff but my mind sharper than it had been in years. I went to the old oak desk in the corner of the room, the one with scratches from decades of use. Pulling open the bottom drawer, I found the leather folder Eleanor had insisted I keep safe. Inside was the old deed, yellowed with time, but still binding in ink. I flipped further and found another document I had nearly forgotten, our family trust agreement, signed with my hand and sealed by the county clerk. And then, tucked away behind those pages, the life insurance policy Eleanor and I had drafted years ago, naming me as trustee with rights over the ranch until my passing. My pulse quickened. I wasn't powerless. I still held the strings. I remembered my old friend, Richard Hayes, a lawyer in town, who had once told me over coffee, "Keep everything in writing, John. Paper protects better than blood." I had nodded then, without knowing how true his words would become. I sat there, holding those papers, feeling the weight of them in my hands. The betrayal still burned, but the fear began to fade. The law was still on my side. Daniel might think his slick words and his business connections could bulldoze me, but he hadn't counted on the ink that bound this ranch tighter than his greed could untangle. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from certainty. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt her spirit at my side, her voice in my ear. "Don't give up, John. Not yet." The room around me seemed to come alive with memories. The worn couch where Caroline once curled up with storybooks, the rug Eleanor picked out on a trip to Santa Fe, the scent of cedar from the old closet. Every object reminded me of what was at stake, what I had to protect. I could feel the pulse of history in those walls, the heartbeat of a family that had survived droughts, wars, and the slow march of time. I wasn't about to let it all end in the greedy hands of a son-in-law who married for money and a daughter who had forgotten gratitude. As the sun dipped lower, the room filled with golden light, stretching shadows across the floorboards. I placed the documents back into the folder, closed it tightly, and pressed it against my chest. My fingers clenched around it as though it were Eleanor's hand. A quiet vow settled in me. I would act. I would not let them win. The betrayal was real, the pain sharp, but my will was sharper. I straightened my shoulders, whispering again to the photograph above the mantel. "They think they've beaten me, but they're wrong. This is just the beginning." With the folder tucked under my arm, I stood in the center of the living room. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from resolve. Tomorrow I will call Richard Hayes. Tomorrow I will begin the fight. Tonight, though, I let the silence of the house hold me, the spirit of Eleanor guide me, and the weight of betrayal harden into a weapon. I had discovered the truth, but now I carried something even stronger, the power to act. And as the evening shadows closed in, I felt ready for the storm that was coming. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun, the house still and blue with early light, and set the leather folder on the kitchen table like a map before a long road. Coffee hissed. My hands were steady. I had spent a night turning pain into something sharper. Today would not be about remembering what I had given. Today would be about what I would keep. I opened the folder, checked the pages, and dialed the number I knew by heart. When Richard Hayes answered, his voice was rough with sleep, but he came awake fast as I laid it out. My daughter, her husband, the plan to sell the ranch for $4.8 million and tuck me away as if I were a problem to be solved. I told him about the new account they had opened last week, the one they thought I didn't know about, seeded with $200,000 from a family fund I established years ago for Caroline's education and first home. Legally, I was still the trustee. That mattered. Richard did not waste words. He asked for the dates. He asked for the account title. He asked if any transfers were pending. I told him what I had learned by reading the mail they left on the counter as if the house were already theirs. He said, "Stay put." He set me on hold, called the bank's legal department, and came back 5 minutes later with instructions I wrote down line by line. I would call the bank manager directly, state my authority as trustee, and request an immediate administrative hold pending review, citing suspected financial exploitation of an elder and irregular changes to a trust account. I repeated the phrasing twice until the words felt like a key. Then he had me email scans of the trust instrument, the signature pages, and the clause about trustee powers. I stood by the printer while the pages slid through, the little green light winking like a nod. Then I called the bank. The manager, a woman named Priya Patel, listened in a measured way that told me she had heard versions of this before. She asked precise questions. She thanked me for being clear. She put me on a brief hold to verify the documents on her screen. When she returned, her tone had changed. Not softer, but firmer. The account would be placed on hold immediately. No debits, no transfers, no cashier's checks. She would file an internal report and forward my documents to the bank's legal team by noon. I felt my lungs expand fully for the first time in days. The conversation ended with a reference number scribbled on the back of an old feed receipt. I underlined it. Twice. Richard called back within minutes. He had already drafted a letter to the bank confirming my rights as trustee, a second letter to Caroline and Daniel instructing them to cease any attempt to access trust funds without written authorization, and a third letter to a title company he suspected they might use if they pushed ahead on a sale. He asked for Edward Collins' contact information. I paused. Even saying Edward's name in this context made my pulse jump. Meridian. Our arrangement. 25 years of quiet stewardship. I told Richard I would handle Edward. Richard said, "Good. Then here's what we do next." We went step by step. I would print and sign. I would overnight hard copies. He would prepare an emergency petition if anything moved before the weekend. He told me to carry the letters with me today. He told me to say less than I wanted to say, if provoked. "Calm is your weapon," he said. "Let them talk. Let them perform." I thanked him. After we hung up, I stood at the sink, both hands on the cool edge of the counter, and let the morning settle into me like a promise. By afternoon, the house had turned bright and busy. Suit bags unzipped. Flower boxes opened. The ranch road rattled with deliveries that had started days earlier, but this wave had more shine to it. Silver chafers, crystal flutes, a monogrammed ice sculpture that would melt under the tent like a slow, expensive hourglass. The wedding had cost me $600,000 by the time the last vendor sent the last revised invoice. I had signed them all. I wanted my daughter to have a day she would remember with joy. I wanted her to feel celebrated in a way that told her she belonged to a story larger than one day. I told myself that kind of love mattered more than my discomfort with the scale of the thing. I told myself a lot of things. The reception filled fast, a glow of dresses and dark suits, a string quartet setting the kind of mood people mistake for decency. I smiled for the photographs. I shook hands with those I would never see again. I said thank you to people who mispronounced my last name. The ranch sat just beyond the tent, the fields quiet and green in the late light, as if the land itself had backed away from the noise to listen. I kept the leather folder zipped inside my jacket. I could feel it against my ribs. Heavy. Real. my anchor. When the time came for toasts, Daniel lifted his glass first. He moved with a confidence that had nothing to do with love. I watched him through the flicker of candlelight and knew I was about to be used as a prop. He thanked the guests. He praised the shrimp towers and the band. He called the day perfect. Then he took a breath and turned toward me with a smile I recognized from men who sell what does not belong to them. His voice carried just enough to cut through the laughter. He told everyone how grateful he was for my support. He added a flourish about family and tradition. Then he said words that drew a tight ring of silence around my chair. He said I had promised to secure the future by handing over the ranch. He used the name of the ranch. He said it with an ease that told me he had rehearsed it. He said we had come to an understanding, and he wanted to publicly thank me for my generosity. The cruelty of it was simple. If I stayed quiet, I would look like I had agreed. If I spoke up, I would look like a small man spoiling his daughter's wedding. My face heated, but my hands did not shake. I heard Richard in my head. Calm is your weapon. I sipped water, not wine. I watched Caroline's expression go from radiant to puzzled to something that felt like distance. The guests were a ripple of whispers, gratitude, promise, generosity. Daniel had chosen his words like knives with velvet handles. That was the first turn, the small twist that cuts early. A toast pretending to be love and landing like a trap. My jaw ached. I kept my seat. I thought of Eleanor standing on the porch in one of her soft cardigans, saying the same thing she said whenever a fence line broke, whenever a calf came breech, whenever a bill landed hard. We handle what is in front of us. We handle it now. The band started again, and people went back to the plates that had been cooling. It did not last long. Daniel left the dance floor and walked toward me with a shape in his hand that caught the light like a prize. A small velvet box. He stood where the nearest tables could see him clearly and lifted the lid. Keys. A ring of keys polished to a smug shine. I recognized the cuts. House, barn, equipment shed. He tilted the box so that people craned to look. Then he said he wanted to exchange symbolic keys with me. He said that would make the family's transition official. He said it like it was charming. He said it like he was giving me the chance to be the man he had just described in his toast. I stood, slowly, not because of age, but because I wanted the moment to stretch long enough for people to note the choice. I looked at the keys. I looked at him. I said I would not be exchanging anything tonight. I said the ranch was not a party favor. I said the matter was not up for public debate. I kept my voice even, as if we were alone. It did not matter. He was ready. He pivoted to the room as if we had rehearsed his next line. He said he was surprised to hear me back away. He said he hated to make a scene, but sometimes the truth needed a witness. He called to Caroline gently and asked her to confirm that we had talked about the future, all of us, and that I had agreed to step aside for the good of the family. Her face froze. She looked at me. In that look, I saw the tug between the girl who followed me through pastures and the woman who had been told I was fading. I heard Forks pause. I heard one woman gasp as if she had been waiting for this play all night. Daniel set the velvet box on our table as if placing a crown, and then took out another ring of keys from his pocket. This time he held them higher. These were copies. He said Caroline had made them as a sweet gift, a gesture, and now we only needed the originals from me to seal the moment. He smiled wider. He asked me to hand them over. He used the word now. Noise filled my ears like wind through a broken window. I felt a wave of something climb my spine, hot and mean. It crested and then passed. I let it pass. Calm is your weapon. I reached for my water again. I set the glass down carefully. There was a world where I shouted. There was a world where I lunged, but I do not live in those worlds. I live here. I live in a world where land is a promise and patience is a tool. I told him no. Only that. Not a speech, not a defense. One clean syllable that sat in the air like a small stone spreading circles in a pond. He narrowed his eyes, and for a moment the polish slipped. I saw the man he was when nobody watched. He took a tiny step closer, enough that I could smell champagne under something sour. He spoke just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. He said he did not understand my confusion. He said I had been forgetful lately. He said it in a tone that begged people to nod. I felt 100 eyes move between us. Caroline whispered my name. I heard it as if from far away. I turned to her and said almost gently that I loved her and would talk with her tomorrow. Not tonight. Not like this. Then I looked at Daniel and told him the same. No more. The murmur thickened, a low thunder in a white tent. He was not done. Men like him are never done when an audience is still warm. He lifted the keys again like a game show host and invited me to be a hero to my daughter. That word landed hard. Hero. He said it as if he had invented it. I stepped back from the table, reached into my jacket, and felt the leather folder press into my palm. It calmed me. It reminded me of the morning, the law, the conversations already moving behind the curtain he loved so much. I turned away from the light, from the eyes, and walked 2 steps toward the edge of the room. I took out my phone, kept it low, and scrolled to the name I needed. When Edward answered, I spoke 3 sentences, and no more. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He said he understood. He said he would alert the board. He asked for time and a place. I told him both. After dawn, at the ranch. He said, "We will be there." The call took less than a minute. I slid the phone back into my pocket and returned to the table with the same calm I had left it. Daniel mistook my quiet for retreat. That pleased him. His shoulders loosened. He turned again to the guests and performed a grinning half-bow that said the matter was as good as done. People clapped, small and unsure. A few of them had already chosen his version of me. A few of them always had. That's all right. I know who I am without a committee. He leaned in close enough for me to see the fine cuts on the keys. He told me we could make this easy. He told me all I had to do was give him what he was due. I said nothing. Silence is a kind of mirror. He did not like what he saw there. He raised his voice a notch and told the crowd how a good father provides, how a real man knows when to pass the torch. Those phrases were not for me. They were for the people in their chairs. He wanted their nods to become a lever. He wanted to pry me open with other people's approval. I stood steady and let the weight of the evening lean into me without pushing me over. I thought about the account freeze confirmed with a reference number on a feed receipt in my pocket. I thought about the letters printed and signed, tucked under the leather flap. I thought about the text I had received from Richard an hour earlier, attaching a draft petition and a note that read, "All ducks in a row." I thought about the brief message from Edward that landed while Daniel was finishing his toast. On our way. I let those words sit at the center of me like an ember. Guests drifted. The band returned to work. This is how nights pretend to move on. But the current had changed. People watched from the corners of their eyes. Caroline stood with 2 bridesmaids, her bouquet held too tight, her mouth moving without sound. She looked young, then older than she should have, then young again. I knew that look, the look of someone caught between what she had been told and what she felt in her bones. I walked to the far edge of the tent where a row of heaters glowed and the air smelled like fresh cedar. I needed a breath that did not belong to the room. I looked out across the field toward the dark line of trees. Somewhere out there were the posts I set with my father, the cornerstones I straightened after storms, the low places where water gathers in a good year and turns the grass a little sweeter. This land knows my name, even if some in this tent have forgotten it. My phone buzzed again. Richard. He kept it short, the way men do when things are in motion. Bank hold confirmed in writing. Letters sent. He had also flagged my county recorder for any sudden filings on the ranch. He told me to go home before midnight if I could. He told me to lock my doors. He told me to leave a porch light on. Not because of fear, but because light helps when people arrive early with purpose. I told him, "Thank you. I meant it in the bone-deep way you thank a man who stands with you in the dark." When I turned back to the party, Daniel was at the bar laughing too loudly with 2 men I did not recognize. His laugh had an edge to it, the sound of someone gripping victory too hard because he is not used to holding anything that does not slip through his fingers. He pointed at me without looking. The men glanced over. One of them smirked. It was a small thing, but you learn to read small things when you live as long as I have. Men who smirk at a father at his daughter's wedding are men who will forget their own in a heartbeat. Caroline found me near the heaters. Her mascara had smudged in a way that made her look like a child awake past bedtime. She asked me what I was doing. She asked me if I wanted to ruin everything. She asked me, in a voice that trembled more with fear than anger, why I could not be generous the way Daniel said I had promised to be. I felt a blade in those words, not because she meant to cut, but because I knew who sharpened them. I told her I loved her. I told her we would talk tomorrow. I told her tonight was not the place for contracts. I told her the ranch was not a bouquet to toss into a crowd. She said Daniel only wanted security for us. I thought of the $200,000 locked behind the hold I had requested. I thought of the developer's glossy brochures. I thought of the word security, the way men use it when they mean control. I did not argue. I let the silence fall between us again, and in that silence, a hint of understanding passed across her face like a small cloud shadow moving over a field. Not certainty, not yet, but a pause. Sometimes a pause is the only gift you can give a person you love when they are adrift. She touched my sleeve, then turned away. I watched her walk back into the bright part of the tent and felt both older and steadier than I had all week. It grew late. The band switched to songs that made the younger ones shout. A line formed for the photo booth. Someone tripped near the dessert table and laughed as if falling were the point. The ice sculpture shrank to a sparkling stump. I stood in the light and the noise and thought about my list. Bank, letters, recorder. Edward. Morning. I was not a man guessing anymore. I was a man counting. Daniel's last move of the night was small and cheap. He slipped the fake keys into the pocket of my jacket while clapping me on the shoulder as if we were relatives who understood each other. He leaned close and whispered that we would finish the exchange at the house later, just the two of us, man to man. I let him think I had not noticed the weight of the metal. I let him think about a lot of things. He walked away smiling, already accepting congratulations from men who think wanting is the same as earning. When the final song ended and the tent emptied in a slow tide, I stepped out into the cooler air and felt the night touch my face cleanly. The stars were bright enough to count. My truck waited with its familiar tick of cooling engine and the faint, comforting smell of leather and dust. I slid into the driver's seat and set the leather folder beside me. I pulled the fake keys from my pocket, turned them in my hand, and felt a laugh push up from a place beyond anger. The copies were slick, meaningless. They opened nothing that mattered. My phone lit the cab with a small blue glow. Edward's message sat on the screen, 9 words that loosened something tight in my chest. We'll be at the ranch at first light. Stand by. Under it, a second message from Richard. Sleep if you can. We are in front of this. I looked back toward the tent where a handful of staff moved like quiet moths. I thought of Daniel, somewhere inside, certain that he had staged the evening into a win. He believed the crowd had done the work for him. He believed the story was already written. That is the comfort of men who mistake noise for outcome. I started the engine. The dashboard lit, a simple, friendly thing. I took one last look at the place where the lights of the tent met the dark of the field. Then I pulled away slowly, gravel crunching under the tires like distant applause. On the road home, I spoke out loud, not a prayer, not quite, but close. They think I have lost the thread. They think age means surrender. They think tonight was the end of me. I let the words hang in the dark truck and then answered them myself, steady and low. They are wrong. The game they started is not the game we will finish. Back at the house, I locked the doors and left the porch light burning, the way Richard had advised. I set the folder on the kitchen table again and smoothed my palm over the cover. Then I opened it one more time. The trust papers were there. The letters were there. A printed copy of the bank's hold confirmation with my reference number starred in blue ink. I added the fake keys to the stack, a small trophy for a man who prefers proof over applause. The clock in the hall clicked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a nightbird called twice and stopped. I pulled a pen from my pocket and wrote a single line on a clean sheet of paper to remind myself in the morning what mattered. Dawn, Edward, bored. Locks changed after. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the doorway, my eyes adjusting to the soft circle from the porch bulb. The living room held the same shapes it had held in the afternoon, but they felt different now. Less like witnesses to pain, more like companions in a quiet readiness. Eleanor's photo caught a slice of light. I nodded to her, to us, to what we had made here out of sweat and stubbornness and evenings that smelled like rain. Then I went to bed and lay on my back with my hands folded over my chest, the way men do when they have set their tools down in a tidy row. Sleep came in pieces, light and practical. Each time I woke, I saw the porch glow and felt the folder's weight in my mind. I did not count sheep. I counted steps, bank, letters, recorder, Edward, morning. In that counting, I found the strange peace that comes when a man stops asking why and starts saying what's next. Just before sleep took me for good, a thought landed clean and cold. Daniel would come to the ranch tomorrow, certain he was collecting what was his. He would bring his smile and his words and his copies. He would stand in my kitchen like a man measuring for curtains. He would not be ready for who else would be sitting at my table. He would not be ready for what documents would be laid out in neat stacks. He would not be ready for what it feels like when a story he wrote out loud meets a truth that was signed, sealed, and witnessed long before he arrived. He thinks he is close to victory. He is wrong. I have my hands on the one thing that changes everything. And tomorrow he will learn what a quiet man can do when the land, the law, and time itself stand on his side. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I had one hand on the tent flap, ready to leave the reception and drive home, when Daniel's voice rose behind me, sharp as a blade. He told the nearest tables that I had promised him the ranch, that I was backing out, and that I was humiliating my own daughter on her wedding night. He used the words promise and betrayal like they were gospel. People turned. I saw faces tilt. I heard my name in a dozen mouths. Then he called across the dance floor to Caroline and asked her, sweet as syrup, to confirm what he had just said. She froze. She looked from him to me and back again. Her chin trembled. Tears slid down her cheekbones and cut thin lines through her makeup. She whispered that she did not understand. She asked me why I would do this to her. It hit me like a hard wind. Not because she meant harm, but because she believed him in that fragile second. That was the cruelest thing, to be a father and be treated like a roomer at your own table. The band fell quiet on a half note. The lights in the tent flickered as if even the generator wanted to step back from the heat of that moment. I turned toward Caroline and told her the same thing I had told her near the heaters earlier. I loved her. We will talk tomorrow. We would not carve up land or love under a white canopy, not with 200 eyes hungry for a scene. I said it softly. Calm is your weapon, Richard had told me. Calm is a door that men like Daniel cannot force. Daniel did not want to be calm. He wanted fire. He cut between us and planted himself so close I could see the pores on his nose. He lifted his hand in a slow, ugly theater like he was about to knock on a door. Then he did not knock. He struck. The slap cracked across my face like a rifle shot in an open field. My head snapped to the side. My ear rang. My skin burned. The tent caught the sound and threw it back at us, so the smack turned into a kind of echo that made time slow down. There is a strange quiet after a blow. I tasted metal. I felt a hot line where his ring had grazed my cheek. Caroline gasped in a voice that came out like a child's. A server dropped a tray. A woman said, "Oh my God," in a way that sounded like both a prayer and a curse. I did not fall. I did not even step back. I put my feet a little wider and let the shock pass like a wave that lifts and lowers a boat that still knows how to float. I should have felt only rage, but what I felt was something steadier. What he had done was not just to me. It was to the land, to Eleanor, to the work and the quiet and the years. And somehow that steadiness kept me standing. The pain was bright, but it had edges I could see. My breath came back in one clean piece. I straightened. I looked him in the eye. He expected me to swing. I did not. He expected me to cower. I did not. I said one thing in a voice that did not shake. Enough. He blinked. He had wanted a different show. He had wanted a brawl he could call confusion. He had wanted the room to protect him from the truth. Instead, the room was airless and still. Caroline pressed a napkin to her mouth and looked at the ground like it might hold an answer if she stared long enough. Then the flap I had been holding opened wide, and cool night air slid in around my shoulders. Edward Collins stepped into the tent as if the timing had been rehearsed. He was not alone. Behind him came 3 men and 2 women in dark suits that did not apologize for being out of place on a ranch. They carried slim briefcases and a sense that they did not come to be liked. Edward's eyes found mine. He nodded once, not a smile, not a frown. A signal. We had said dawn. He had arrived sooner. Maybe he had guessed the night would not end clean. Maybe he had seen enough fools in rooms like this to know what fools always do. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Quiet can travel farther than shouting when the ground is ready. He introduced himself and the others as representatives of the Meridian Agricultural Trust. He said the trust was here at my request. He said the trust owed a duty to the property known as Double W Ranch, its operations, its staff, and its manager, me, under a management contract executed 25 years ago. He laid a leather folio on the nearest table and opened it so that the top page faced the crowd. The paper was old enough to have a life of its own. It was stamped and signed. It had the date. It had my name in one place and Meridian's in many. It had the words purchase, leaseback, and manager, not owner. He placed a second document beside it, a current status letter with today's date, reaffirming the arrangement and my authority to operate the ranch on Meridian's behalf. A murmur rolled through the nearest tables like a breeze through tall grass. Daniel stared at the paper as if it had insulted him. Then he laughed. The laugh was thin. He said this was ridiculous. He told the guests that this was a stunt. He told Caroline that I had gone senile. He asked the room how many people had seen me drink tonight, as if that would erase ink that had been dry for 2 decades. He reached for the contract, but Edward placed his hand flat on the page like a man protecting a family Bible. He did not push Daniel's hand away. He did not have to. Sometimes a thing as simple as presence is enough to stop a child from grabbing what is not his. Edward nodded to the woman at his right. She introduced herself as Meridian's counsel. Her voice had the clean edge of steel. She said the ranch had been owned by Meridian since 1998. She said I had been the manager since the day of the sale. She pointed to the clause that required confidentiality to prevent political headaches and preserve operations. She said those conditions had been fully met. She said any attempt to sell, pledge, or otherwise encumber the property without board approval was void on its face. She looked at Daniel while she said void. She did not look away. Then she moved her finger to the signature line where my name appeared as manager, not owner, and let the room see it with its own eyes. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a word that would make the paper change. None came. He recovered the way a man recovers when he thinks volume might replace logic. He said, "This is my wife's inheritance." He said, "We have plans." He said, "This old man told us." And then the lawyer cut gently across his sentence by turning a second page. She did not ask permission. She said, "Here is the trust accounting from last quarter." She pointed to line items labeled well maintenance, feed contracts, property tax payments, ranch hand salaries, and veterinary services. Meridian paid them all. She turned to a third page. She put down a copy of the bank's hold notice bearing my reference number and the account title that included Caroline's name, but named me as trustee. She said, "No further disbursements will be made pending review." The air in the tent thickened. I watched Daniel scan for a friendly face and find none within reach. Then Edward gave the floor to a second man, calm and gray at the temples. He introduced himself as Meridian's risk director. He held a slim folder that looked almost too light to contain anything that could hurt. He said Meridian had conducted a review of threats to the ranch's operations in light of recent events. He said the review had included standard background checks on parties attempting to influence ranch management. His tone was gentle, like a doctor about to deliver news and determined not to gloat. He stated the findings without drama because the facts were dramatic enough. He said Daniel carried $180,000 in unsecured debt. He listed 3 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and 1 gambling marker that had been sold to a collection firm with a reputation. He said Daniel's prior marriage had ended with allegations of financial misconduct and a civil judgment that had been satisfied only after the plaintiff liquidated her jewelry business. He said Daniel had been in contact with a Dallas developer regarding a $4.8 million offer on the ranch that Daniel had no legal authority to entertain. He said emails included phrases like finder's fee and expedited commission. He said the correspondence made clear Daniel understood that a third party believed the land would be vacant within months. The word vacant landed with a low groan somewhere in my chest. Vacant where Eleanor's roses grew. Vacant where the oak stood tall. Daniel stepped forward, hands wide, palms up, a man who wants to sell sincerity he does not own. He said this was all out of context. He said the debts were temporary. He said the developer was just having a conversation about potential. He said he was trying to secure a future, not steal a past. He raised his voice until it wobbled. He pointed at me and called me vindictive. He pointed at Caroline and called her naive. He pointed at Edward and called him a vulture. He called the board carpetbaggers. He said I had promised, and the room had heard it during the toast. He reached for the velvet box on the table and shook the keys so that they rattled like coins in a tin cup. He called the keys a symbol of a new chapter. One of the Meridian men set a small, polite hand on Daniel's wrist and lowered the box without force. It is a strange thing to watch a full-grown man be moved by almost nothing. He is only heavy if belief carries him. Caroline's knees went out from under her, and a bridesmaid caught her by the elbow. She stood again, unsteady, and looked at the paper. I saw her read my name in its right place. I saw the moment when structure replaced rumor. She pressed the napkin to her face again and whispered, "Dad," in a voice that tried to cross a field that pride had fenced for months. I nodded to her. I did not say anything extravagant. Sometimes a nod is the only language a father can speak without breaking. Meridian's counsel set one more document on the table. It was a letter addressed to me on Meridian's letterhead. The words were clean and short. It affirmed my authority as ranch manager. It confirmed the board's support. It authorized me to restrict access to the property to any person, including family members, whose presence posed a risk to operations. It attached a proposed protective order for a court to sign if needed. It used phrases the law likes because they do not wobble. Immediate, irreparable harm, status quo, probable right, probable injury. The paper did not shout. It did not need to. Edward lifted his head from the table and addressed the room as if he were lifting a lantern. He said, "We protect our people. We protect our land." He did not pound the table. He did not ask for applause. He looked at Daniel and said, "This is finished?" The words entered me like a clean breath after smoke. Daniel's last stand was loud and ugly. He called me incompetent. He said an evaluation would show I was unfit. I thought of the medical reports in my folder at home. I thought of the clear lines and numbers that said my blood pressure was steady, that my mind was sharp, that my body was stronger than most men a quarter century younger. I did not pull those papers out. They were for a different room. Instead, I said one sentence. They thought I was weak, but now they see the consequences. I did not say it to crush him. I said it because the truth sometimes needs a voice to keep it from floating off like a balloon. Someone in the back of the tent clapped once, an involuntary sound like a cough. It did not swell into anything because this was not a movie. The reality was smaller and more satisfying. The reality was the way people looked at the paper instead of the man who had loved the microphone. The reality was the way a server quietly moved the velvet box to the edge of the table, as if removing a toy from a grown man's reach. The reality was the way Caroline stepped to stand a foot closer to me without making a speech about it. Then security arrived, the venue's first, and 2 men Meridian had brought and kept near the parking area in case the talk turned to harm. They did not grab Daniel. They asked him to leave the tent. He refused. He raised his voice again and spilled words like marbles across a floor. His rights, my lies, the cruel luck of meeting a family that did not know how to share. He tried to reach for Caroline's hand. She stepped behind me. The movement was so small and so complete that it broke something in him. He saw he had lost her, not because of me, but because of himself. When he tried to push past the Meridian guard and caught the edge of my jacket, I did not flinch. The guard did not shove. He pivoted, caught Daniel's wrist, and turned him apart from the crowd in a move so economical it looked like grace. Daniel swore. He yanked. He found that a body built on indignation does not bend like a body trained for duty. They walked him toward the flap. He twisted his head around and searched for an ally. His gaze landed on me, and for a breath I saw the boy inside the man, the one who believed being loud would make him safe. Then the layer of anger slid back across his face like a mask, and he shouted that this was not over. Edward said without anger, "It is." They took him out into the night. The tent exhaled. The sound was not applause or relief exactly. It was more like the way a house settles after a storm passes and leaves only the drum of water from the eaves. The band did not start again. No one wanted background music for the part where reality returns. Caroline came to me and put both hands on my forearm. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't see it. I didn't see any of it." I put my hand over hers and squeezed once. "You see it now," I said. "That's enough for tonight." We stood like that in a small circle of quiet while people found their coats and avoided our eyes, not out of meanness, but out of the simple human need to pretend they had not been too fascinated by someone else's trouble. Edward gathered the papers, slid them into the folio with almost tender movements, and told me the board would meet me in the morning as planned. He said they had accelerated the timeline because the risk had accelerated. He said the letters had been sent. He asked me to call if Daniel appeared on the property overnight. He did not tell me to be careful in a way that would make me feel old. He told me to be careful in a way that makes a man feel like a man among men. "We have your back," he said. It is a small phrase. It is worth more than most things money buys. By the time I stepped out of the tent, the stars were clearer and the wind had shifted. The ice sculpture was a damp, misshapen stump under a film of light. The field smelled like wet cedar and cut grass, and something else I cannot name that always smells like a fresh start, no matter how tired you are. I drove home slowly. The leather folder rode beside me. I thought about the slap again and the way it had failed to move me. I thought about the way truth had walked into a room where lies had been rehearsed. I thought about Eleanor and the oak and the creek and the porch and the list that had kept me steady. Bank, letters, recorder, Edward, morning. I added one more word for the next chapter in my head. Consequences. At the kitchen table, I set the folio down and opened it again under the warm light, not because I did not trust what I had seen, but because a man sleeps better when he can touch the edges of the paper that changed the air. The contract was there, the status letter. The bank holds confirmation with my reference number in small type that felt like a bell. I added a fresh page from Richard's evening email, printed while I changed my shirt, a proposed restraining order, pre-filled with names and dates, ready for a judge's hand. It was summarized tonight without poetry. Assault on an elder, attempted financial exploitation, specific acts, specific witnesses. It named the ranch as property managed by Meridian and me as its representative. It used a sentence that made my ribs unclench for the first time in hours. Further contact is not in the interest of justice. I pressed my palm flat on the stack and closed my eyes. I felt the weight of what had been saved. I also felt the weight of what had been lost. A daughter's easy trust does not grow back like grass after rain. It grows slowly like an oak. It grows in rings you cannot see until years have passed, and you cut the trunk and count. But it can grow. That is what matters. We would begin that work tomorrow in the quiet after the board meeting. I would listen, she would speak. We would say the worst parts out loud and let them sit between us until we could breathe again without tasting metal. I walked to the living room and stood in front of Eleanor's picture. The porch light spilled a circle onto the floor. "We turned it," I whispered. "We turned it to our favor." I do not know if people hear us after they're gone. I know the act of speaking can lay a weight down gently instead of dropping it. I know my shoulders felt lighter when I said her name. Sleep did not come fast. My cheek throbbed in time with my pulse. My ear still sang a little. When I finally drifted, I saw flashes of the tent and the keys and the paper and Caroline's face when the napkin fell from her mouth and she whispered "Dad" like a person remembering a word she had loved as a child. I slept and woke and slept again. Each time I woke, I thought of Dawn and the board and the locks I would change as soon as we were done talking. Morning would bring the next chapter, not the last. There would be calls to make, doors to close, and doors to open. There would be a conversation with the sheriff if Meridian chose to press charges. There would be a visit with the bank manager who had been kind but firm. There would be a quiet walk along the fence line because that is how a man resets his mind, one step at a time, along a boundary he can touch. But tonight had given me the thing I had not had when the day began. It had given me the moment when a lie fell flat and stayed flat. It had given me the sound of a room choosing paper over performance. It had given my daughter the sight of how truth works when it is not loud but steady. I shut off the kitchen light, left the porch bulb glowing, and stood for a breath in the doorway to the hall. The house settled around me like it had found its own balance again. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere out back, a night bird called once and then changed its mind. I told myself one last sentence, simple and final. We are back in control. The words did not make me triumphant. They made me calm, the way a man is calm when the weather breaks just enough to get back in the field. Feeling unseen in your own family is heavy, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves justice, comment the keyword justice. Now watch what they'll do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the chaos felt different, lighter, though my cheek still burned where Daniel had struck me. The house was silent except for the slow tick of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator, but I knew this was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence that comes before a new chapter, when the dust has settled and you can finally see the path ahead. Caroline came to the ranch office early, her eyes swollen from tears, her voice thin but steady. She said she was ready to face the Meridian board with me, and for the first time in months, I believed her. We sat across from Edward Collins and the Meridian directors, the leather folio open between us like a ledger of all that had been fought for. The ranch's value was not just the land, the $2 million it commanded on paper, but the history, the sweat, the legacy that Eleanor and I had poured into every fence post, every acre of grass. Edward spoke with the calm tone of a man who knew he carried authority, but he looked at Caroline as much as he looked at me. He asked if we were prepared to transfer the management formally to her name with the safeguards we had agreed upon. My hand rested on the table, still, until Caroline reached across and laid her palm over mine. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." And in that moment, I saw not the girl who had doubted me, but the daughter who had found her way back. The papers came next, thick stacks of agreements drafted overnight. I signed first steadily, my name looping across the lines that would ensure the ranch remained with the family through her stewardship. Caroline signed second, her hand trembling slightly, but her signature bold enough to anchor the page. Then Edward slid across the final sheet, an addendum that stripped Daniel of any legal access, forbidding him from representing himself in any dealings tied to the ranch. I signed that one without hesitation, the pen pressing so firmly the ink nearly bled through. For years I had signed checks, contracts, and school forms, all to support them. This was the first time I signed something to protect myself. When it was done, Edward closed the folio with a snap, and it sounded like a door locking behind us. News of Daniel's downfall spread faster than I expected. Within days, the sheriff served him with charges: assault on an elder, financial fraud, and attempted misrepresentation of property. The developer withdrew interest, unwilling to be tied to a scandal. The banks cut off his credit lines. His debts, which he had hidden like rotten fruit under a blanket, surfaced in the open. Caroline told me he had moved into a one-bedroom rental on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint and a single window that looked out onto a parking lot. No rose garden, no rolling pasture, just asphalt and the echo of mistakes. I did not gloat, but I did not mourn either. He had chosen his path. He had dug his own pit and now had to live at the bottom of it. For Caroline, it was different. She came to the ranch more often, not with demands, but with apologies. We walked the pastures together, sometimes speaking, sometimes just letting the silence mend what had been torn. One afternoon, she stopped near the oak tree and asked, "How do we start again, Dad?" I looked at her, at the woman she had become, and I said the truth as plain as it came. We start by telling the truth, always. She nodded, and though tears streaked her cheeks, she smiled in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, climbing the same tree with skinned knees and a laugh like music. The hurt was still there, but so was the beginning of healing. Peace came back to me in small, familiar shapes. I planted roses in the garden bed Eleanor had loved, the deep red kind she used to cut and place in a crystal vase on the dining table. Their scent filled the air each morning, a reminder of her patience and her grace. I began to walk the ranch with my grandson, his small hand gripping mine as we counted the cows or tossed stones into the creek. He asked me about the old barn, about the tractors, about the oak. He never asked about the fight. Children don't care about scandals. They care about stories, about the way your voice sounds when you tell them the land remembers their footsteps. With him beside me, I felt lighter, anchored in the promise that the ranch still held a future worth tending. Daniel never returned to the ranch. He called once, late at night, his voice slurred with desperation. He begged for another chance, said Caroline would forgive him, and said he had been misunderstood. I listened quietly until his words ran dry. Then I told him something I had learned too late. A man without truth has no home. I hung up before he could answer. That was the last time I heard his voice. Caroline filed for annulment soon after, her lawyers moving faster than he could scramble. She chose her freedom, and in that choice I saw the daughter I had always hoped to raise. When the paperwork was done, when the ranch was safe, when the roses bloomed again and the sound of laughter returned to the fields, I finally felt something I had not felt in years. Freedom, not from responsibility, but from the weight of betrayal. Freedom from the gnawing doubt that maybe I had failed as a father. I realized now that failure would have been silence. Failure would have been surrender. But I had spoken. I had stood. I had chosen dignity, even when the world wanted a spectacle. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills and the sky bleed into shades of gold and purple, I whispered to Eleanor's picture that hung inside the screen door. We did it. We saved it. The oak stood tall, the ranch stretched wide, and the future, though changed, still belonged to those who would honor it. The lesson that came to me was simple, but it had cost dearly. Blood may bind us, but respect sustains us. Without truth, family is nothing more than a name on a page. With truth, even wounds can heal, even fences can be mended. I finally understood that my worth was not measured by how much I gave, but by the boundaries I set. I whispered again, softer this time, I am finally free. Life moved on quietly after that. The ranch carried its rhythms, and I carried mine. Yet I knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something gentler. Caroline suggested we open the ranch to local students for field trips to let children learn where food comes from and why land must be protected. I nodded, thinking Eleanor would have liked that. And in that small idea, I felt the tug of a new chapter calling, one not about betrayal or survival, but about giving, teaching, and planting seeds for others. Yes, the wounds would always be part of me, but so would the strength I had found standing against them. And as the cicadas sang and the stars began to scatter above the fields, I leaned back in my chair, the roses swaying in the evening breeze, and I knew my story was not over. It had only just begun. I never thought I would find peace again, not after the storm that nearly tore my family apart. But peace did come, not with thunder or fanfare, but in the quiet choices I made each day. The first was giving away what I no longer needed to keep for myself. I transferred $300,000 into a local charity fund, one that built scholarships for children of struggling farmers. It felt right. That money had once been my shield against fear, a number on a page that Daniel had tried to twist into chains. Now, in different hands, it became freedom for someone else. When I walked into the community center to sign the papers, the director shook my hand with tears in her eyes. "You've changed lives with this," she whispered. And in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years. Caroline took to her new role at the ranch with a kind of determination I had doubted she still had. Each week she drove out, wearing jeans and boots instead of silk dresses, meeting with workers, asking questions about cattle feed and soil. She started small, repairing a barn roof, restoring fences, and meeting with Edward Collins to secure contracts. Slowly, neighbors who once whispered about her silence during Daniel's betrayal began to nod with respect again. The ranch, worth $2 million on paper, was worth far more in pride. Watching her earn back the trust of the community was like watching a broken bridge rebuilt plank by plank. I kept my distance most days, but now and then she'd call me with updates. "Dad, we sold the hay at market. Dad, the calves are healthy this season." Her voice carried hope, and that was enough for me. Then came the letter. Daniel's handwriting scrawled across the envelope, shaky and desperate. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the words spilled with regret, apologies twisted into excuses. He claimed he had been blinded by ambition, that he had loved Caroline but lost himself. He begged for forgiveness and asked if I could speak to her on his behalf. My hands tightened around the paper until it crumpled. I read the final line, "I hope someday you'll understand," and felt nothing but a cold certainty. I ripped the letter clean in two, then in four, and dropped it in the trash. "I don't need his apology," I said aloud to the empty room. "I have my life." And in that moment, I knew I had finally closed that chapter for good. My new home was nothing like the ranch, but it was mine. A small house worth $220,000 nestled near a park where the laughter of children echoed in the afternoons. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, the kitchen was simple, and the living room was just large enough for a couch and a rocking chair. But the view from the back porch looked out onto a pond, and in the evenings I would sit with a cup of tea and watch the ducks glide across the water. No secrets were hiding in the corners, no footsteps plotting betrayal. Just quiet. Just peace. I planted roses along the walkway, red ones like Eleanor had loved, and every time I watered them, I imagined her smiling, her voice in the wind saying, "This is enough." And it was. I thought often about what all of this had taught me, and I knew I had to frame it not just as survival, but as a lesson worth passing on. To parents, I say this: love your children deeply, but guard your boundaries with equal care. Giving them everything without limits does not teach gratitude. It risks teaching entitlement. I gave too freely, believing love alone would keep them grounded. It did not. I learned that to protect them, you must also protect yourself. To the children who may one day hear my story, remember this. Greed is poison. It does not fill you. It hollows you out. Caroline nearly lost everything because she trusted the wrong man and forgot where she came from. Learn gratitude before it's too late. And to anyone listening, young or old, in this modern world where money shouts and truth often whispers, remember that character is the only inheritance that cannot be stolen. Property can be signed away, accounts drained, but your name, your honor, your truth, that is forever. One afternoon, as I walked back from the park, an old neighbor stopped me. He carried with him a small wooden box, worn smooth from years of use. "Found this cleaning my attic," he said. Inside was a pocket watch that had belonged to my father, the man who had first taught me that the land is not wealth, but responsibility. The watch had stopped years ago, but when I held it, I felt time settle around me. I wound it gently, and to my surprise, the ticking returned, slow and steady. I smiled, whispering to myself, "Still works, just needed a little care." And I realized, so did I. The betrayal, the pain, all of it had nearly stopped me. But with care, with choice, with truth, I had begun to tick again. Daniel never returned to my doorstep. Word reached me that he had taken a job in another state, working late shifts to pay down debts he could no longer hide. He lived alone in a rented apartment, his reputation ruined, his plans turned to dust. Perhaps one day he would change, but that was not my burden anymore. His story was no longer tied to mine. Caroline rarely mentioned him, except to say she had learned a lesson she would never forget. For her, forgiveness was slow, but for me, distance was enough. My days now are quiet, filled with roses, walks, and the sound of my grandson's laughter when he visits. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch the sun slip behind the trees, the sky painted in colors so soft they could break your heart. And I think of all that was nearly lost and all that was saved. I whisper to Eleanor, as I often do, "We made it. We're still standing." In the end, what I carry is not bitterness, but clarity. The clarity that a family without respect is just a word. The clarity that love must be matched with boundaries. The clarity that truth outlasts lies. And the final words I hold close, the lesson I hope others will remember, are simple. Character is the only asset no one can take from you. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.